There's a specific kind of anxiety that happens when you're 55 and you start doing the retirement math for real, not the vague someday math, the actual numbers, how much you have, how much you'll need, how many years it has to last. And somewhere in that calculation, you realize that what you've saved might not be enough. Not for the retirement you imagined, maybe not even for a basic one. And the weight of that realization sits differently than it did at 30 or 40 because now you're running out of time to fix it. My name is Anderson, and I need to show you something about retirement wealth that almost nobody understands until they're already retired. Here's what most people believe. You save for 40 years, you retire with whatever you've accumulated, and then you slowly spend it down until it runs out or you do. The goal is to die with zero or close to it. Use it all up. Enjoy it while you can. That's the standard model. That's what the financial industry tells you to expect. But here's the truth that changes everything. The wealthiest retirees don't spend down their portfolios, they grow them. And the gap between someone who retires with $500,000 and ends with nothing versus someone who retires with $500,000 and ends with over $2 million isn't luck or inheritance or market. Timing. It's a completely different operating system that most people never learn exists. Let me say that again. Retirement isn't about spending what you saved, it's about structuring what you saved so it grows faster than you need it. Think about what that means. Most retirees are trying to figure out how to make their money last, how to stretch it, how to ration it. They're in scarcity mode from day one. But a small group of retirees are asking a completely different question. How do I structure this so it compounds even while I'm using it? Same starting point, completely different ending. Here's the invisible threshold that separates these two groups. It's not the amount of money they have, it's whether they understand the withdrawal sequence game. Most people think retirement is simple. Save money, retire, withdraw 4% a year, hope it lasts. But that 4% rule is based on one massive assumption, that you're trying to preserve your principal for 30 years without growth. It's a defensive strategy. Don't run out. That's the goal. But what if the goal wasn't just preservation? What if it was multiplication? Let me show you what happens when you shift the framework. Traditional retirement says you have $500,000 at 65, you withdraw 4%, which is $20,000 a year. Combined with Social Security, maybe you're getting $45,000 total annually. You live on that. The portfolio stays roughly flat if markets cooperate. And over 30 years, you gradually deplete it until there's not much left. That's the plan most people follow, and it works, barely, if nothing goes wrong. But here's what nobody tells you. That same $500,000, structured differently, can turn into over $2 million by the time you're 90. Same person, same starting amount, completely different result. How? Because wealthy retirees don't just withdraw, they allocate. Here's the math that changes everything. Take that $500,000 and split it into 3 buckets. Bucket 1, $100,000 in cash and short-term bonds. This is your spending money for the next 5 years, $20,000 a year. You don't touch the stock market for living expenses. You live off this safe bucket. Bucket 2, $150,000 in dividend-paying stocks and REITs. This generates income, maybe 4 to 5% annually, around $7,000 a year that gets reinvested or supplements bucket 1 when needed. Bucket 3, $250,000 in growth stocks and index funds. This is money you don't touch for at least 10 years. It just compounds. Now watch what happens. While you're living off bucket 1 for 5 years, bucket 3 is growing. If it averages 8%, that $250,000 becomes $368,000 in 5 years. Your dividend bucket is generating income and slowly growing. And when bucket 1 runs out after 5 years, you don't panic. You replenish it by selling some of bucket 3, which has now grown substantially. You refill bucket 1 with another $100,000, and you still have more left in bucket 3 than you started with. That's the secret. You're spending, but you're growing faster than you're spending. And the longer this goes, the wider the gap becomes. Let me walk you through the 20-year projection. At year 5, you've spent $100,000, but your total portfolio is now around $570,000 because buckets 2 and 3 grew while you were living off bucket 1. At year 10, you've spent $200,000 total, but your portfolio is at $680,000. At year 15, you've spent $300,000, but you're sitting on $820,000. At year 20, you've spent $400,000 in total living expenses, and your portfolio is worth over $1 million. You spent almost as much as you started with, and you still doubled your money. That's not magic. That's the structure. Here's the psychological transformation that has to happen for this to work. You have to stop thinking like someone who's running out of time and start thinking like someone who's managing a system. Most retirees panic. They see their account balance drop every time they take a withdrawal, and it triggers scarcity thinking. They start cutting back. They stop enjoying retirement because they're terrified of running out. But retirees who understand the bucket system aren't watching their total balance obsessively. They know bucket 1 is supposed to go down. That's its job. They're watching bucket 3 grow, and as long as bucket 3 is compounding faster than bucket 1 is depleting, they're winning. That shift from scarcity to systems thinking changes everything. It's the difference between hoarding money you're afraid to spend and confidently using money because you know it's replenishing itself. Now, here's where the identity shift happens. Wealthy retirees stop seeing themselves as people who are done working and start seeing themselves as portfolio managers. They don't retire from making decisions. They retire from jobs they didn't want, but they stay engaged with their money. They rebalance. They watch for opportunities. They adjust their withdrawal rate based on market conditions. They're active, not passive, and that engagement is what keeps their wealth growing instead of shrinking. Let me show you what this looks like in practical terms. You're 65 with $500,000. Most advisors will tell you to shift heavily into bonds to reduce risk. 60% bonds, 40% stocks. Safe and stable. But here's the problem. Bonds don't grow, they preserve. And if you're going to live another 30 years, preservation isn't enough. You need growth. So instead, you keep 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds and cash. It feels riskier, but it's actually safer long-term because your portfolio can outpace inflation and withdrawals. Now let's say the market crashes 2 years into retirement. Your $500,000 drops to $400,000. This is where most retirees panic and lock in losses by selling. But someone using the bucket strategy doesn't panic. They're still living off bucket 1, which didn't crash because it's in cash. Bucket 3 took the hit, but they're not touching it for another 8 years. So they wait. They let it recover. And by year 5, when they need to refill bucket 1, the market has bounced back and bucket 3 is growing again. Same crash. A completely different experience. That's the power of structure. It removes the emotional decisions that destroy retirement portfolios. Here's where opportunities start looking different. When the market drops and everyone else is scared, the retiree with a bucket system sees a buying opportunity. They've got cash in bucket 1. They're not forced to sell. So they can actually move some of that cash into bucket 3 while stocks are cheap. They're buying low while their neighbors are panic selling. Same event. Opposite response. And that difference compounds over decades into massive wealth gaps. Or consider healthcare costs. Most retirees treat a major medical expense as a catastrophe. They drain their savings, they go into debt. But a retiree with a properly structured portfolio has options. They can pull from bucket 1 without disrupting bucket 3. They can use dividends from bucket 2. They can adjust their allocation temporarily. They're not scrambling. They're making strategic decisions because they built a system that can absorb shocks. Now, let me give you the big decision that most retirees get wrong: housing. By the time you're 65, your house is probably paid off, and the conventional wisdom says stay in it. It's paid for, it's familiar, but here's what nobody calculates. that house is still costing you thousands a year in taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities. Maybe $15,000 to $20,000 annually, and it's tying up $300,000 to $500,000 in equity that's not growing or generating income. Compare that to selling the house, downsizing to a rental or a smaller place, and investing the difference. Suddenly, you've got an extra $300,000 in your portfolio. At 8% growth, that's $24,000 a year in gains. More than enough to cover rent and still grow your net worth. You go from paying to maintain a depreciating asset to having your money work for you. Same person, different choices. Completely different retirement trajectory. Here's the career power shift that happens even in retirement. When you have a growing portfolio instead of a shrinking one, you stop feeling like you have to accept whatever comes your way. If you want to work part-time for extra income or purpose, you can be selective. You take projects you enjoy, not ones you need. You negotiate from strength because you're not desperate. And that confidence, that posture of choice rather than necessity, that shows up in every aspect of your life. You're not a retiree struggling to make ends meet. You're someone managing wealth who happens to not have a full-time job. Now, let me give you the warning that destroys most retirement plans. The first 5 years of retirement are when people make their biggest mistakes. They finally have time and money, so they splurge. They take expensive trips, they buy the RV, they help the kids with down payments, and suddenly they've pulled out $150,000 in the first 3 years instead of the planned $60,000, and now their portfolio doesn't have enough mass to compound effectively. They've sabotaged the whole system before it had time to work. The retirees who turn $500,000 into $2 million don't treat retirement as permission to spend recklessly. They treat year 1 of retirement the same as year 39 of working, strategically. They stick to the plan, they let the buckets do their job, they don't raid bucket 3 for a boat. And because of that discipline, their later retirement years are dramatically more comfortable than their neighbors who front-loaded all the spending. Here's the thing about opportunity cost in retirement that nobody explains properly. Every dollar you spend in year 1 is a dollar that won't compound for the next 25 years. If you spend an extra $50,000 on luxuries in your first year retired, you're not just spending $50,000, you're spending what that would have become. At 8% over 25 years, that's $340,000. One splurge decision just cost you $250,000 of future wealth. I'm not saying don't enjoy retirement. I'm saying I understand the trade. That trip around the world might be worth it, but know what you're actually paying. Know that you're choosing current experience over future security, and make that choice consciously, not impulsively. So here's what I want you to take from this. Retirement isn't the finish line where you stop thinking about money. It's the beginning of a new phase where money management becomes more important, not less. The difference between struggling through retirement and thriving through it isn't how much you saved, it's how you structure what you saved. It's whether you built a system that compounds or a pile that depletes. The retirees who turn $500,000 into over $2 million aren't lucky. They're structured. They use buckets to separate spending from growth. They stay invested in stocks longer than conventional wisdom suggests. They avoid panic selling during downturns. They make big strategic decisions about housing and lifestyle instead of just cutting back on coffee. And they treat their portfolio like a machine that needs maintenance and optimization, not a piggy bank that gets smashed open. You have time right now to set this up correctly. Whether you're 20 years from retirement or 2 years or already retired, you can restructure around this model. You can build the buckets. You can shift your allocation toward growth. You can stop thinking about running out and start thinking about multiplication. It's not complicated. It just requires a different framework than the one most people use. And 25 years from now, when you're 90 and your portfolio is worth more than it was when you retired, when you've spent decades living comfortably without fear, when you realize you're going to leave more to your kids than you ever thought possible, you're going to remember this moment. The moment you learned that retirement isn't about preservation, it's about intelligent structure. The moment you stopped thinking like someone winding down and started thinking like someone building up,